Yo, what's cracking, folks? Welcome to episode number 24 of The Painter and the Pixie.
Yes, 24.
Yeah, man.
Like the TV show.
Yes, just like the TV show 24. Big Kiefer Sutherland fan. I'm your host, Gerry Vassar, and as always, I am joined by your other very lovely host, my wife, Serina Vassar.
Hi, everybody.
And so this week we have a fun episode that Serina and I are very excited about. Actually, who's going to be sitting right next to us very shortly is my dad, Gerry Vassar, and just a little bit of background. If anybody hasn't heard him on my other podcast from a couple years ago here, my dad is the president and CEO of Lakeside Educational Network. I think they might just go by Lakeside at this point, or
Lakeside Global Institute.
Global Institute is the new jam. So they do a wide smattering of things. A lot of it has to do with early childhood development. Part of their organization is a alternative school for kids that may get kicked out of their high school or middle school. It's a lot. They do a lot with trauma-informed care, and they also
trauma-impacted students,
and they teach a lot of what would you call the IFP stuff?
I don't know.
Well, they teach folks that deal with like
caretakers of children like that, people who are in caregiving roles, so that they can be trauma informed and know how to better serve them effectively, help them to get through things, learn how to rewire their brains and regulate and all of that.
Yeah, so super deep in the trauma and kind of relationship world, and a lot of really cool stuff. And then my dad on the side, on top of all the other things that he does, has been a counselor for the past 31 some years.
Time.
Super long time. He's been doing it.
He's a great counselor.
Really, really fantastic counselor that's been independently verified numerous times over. And, my brother and I always called him the oh shit guy, because when people said oh shit, they would call my dad.
Yep, and he'd fix the problem.
And he would fix it. So, we also affectionately call him Yoda, because he's just that kind of you guys, you'll get it.
You'll get it.
So what we talked about, because one of my dad's main kind of areas of expertise, because he deals a lot with, people that have, less than stellar relationships, is actually relational health, relational integrity, and those types of things.
How do you build healthy relationships?
And as you've heard Serina and I talk about on this show before, we really want to help people build frameworks to flourish. And my dad really presents his kind of core framework for how to approach, maintain, and implement healthy relationships and in a sustainable, long-term way, so that you're safe, the other person's safe, and it is one of my favorite topics to kind of.
It is. It's a great topic.
Talk about with him.
Feel safe in relationships, but be comfortable and have healthy relationships with people. How do you do that in a community where people are unpredictable in these things? So it's
right.
Awesome episode.
So I really think you guys are going to enjoy it. It was one of my favorites that we have recorded thus far, and I hope that you enjoy it. So without further ado, please welcome my dad, Gerry Vassar.
This is only the beginning.
All right, ready?
Ready?
What you're going to hear about today is nothing short of a miracle.
Well, I don't believe it.
Let's find out. Ready, set, go.
Hello, everyone. How you guys doing today?
Hi. Good, thanks.
Hello.
So we have my dad, who I'm sure we have covered in the intro, is joining us today on Father's Day.
Yeah.
So happy Father's Day, Dad.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us on the Painter and the Pixie, and we're kind of going into a little bit of a different situation today. I guess we're technically a health and lifestyle podcast, so we are
part of it.
we've done a lot with nutrition and a lot with exercise so far. So today we're going to be looking at some brain state regulation stuff, but also we're going to talk about having healthy relationships. And I think we're going to break that down on an individual level and then start to kind of, expand it out into the community, a piece of things.
Yeah.
So that was kind of our thoughts, because for those who haven't heard my dad before, I would say relationships are kind of like one of your main jams as far as like how to have them in a healthy way.
We try.
Healthy and sustainable.
We try.
I would just thought, I guess one of the things that is always been one of my favorite things that you talk about is the relational integrity spectrum, and maybe a good place to start is to start with having healthy relationships on the individual level, because that's really that's where people start. So you have, you meet someone new, and it might be whatever context is, whether it's work or, at the gym, just going to be a friend, or maybe it's in a church or another community group. And then kind of how do you then progress through all of those phases to actually have a healthy relationship with somebody that's actually sustainable?
I think one of the most interesting difficulties that people have is answering the one baseline question, who do I trust? Or how can I trust? Mm-hmm. So we encounter people all over life. And I find that people have this interesting sense of meeting someone, particularly someone in authority or someone who they think they should be respecting, or sometimes it's anybody, and they immediately start taking their own needs and placing them in an umbrella over the relationship and saying, I'm going to some level entrust myself to you, even though I've just met you. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then we find ourselves in all kinds of different issues because of the expectations we set that come along with that.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
So I assume a level of trust. I assume that as I form a relationship with somebody I don't even know, that I have certain expectations that relationship is going to be coming to me in a way that I feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. And my interesting question to people is, why would you think that?
Very good question.
Why would you, one of the interesting things is we go to people who are, let's say, out dating. They meet people in strange places, bars and other places that they're encountering them. And all of a sudden they're going out and they're having dinner and then they're doing other things. And I find that people think because there is an attraction that I should immediately begin to trust this person with who I am. And how many times do we know people who have done that and found themselves either in danger or in deep trouble or angry, and then all of a sudden you see all the Facebook posts and all the things that go on and you go, oh my goodness, this is a mess. And in fact, it could have all been prevented with just a little bit of intentionality in how we form the relationship.
And then it seems like in a lot of those spaces that you have, sometimes there's an automatic assumption of trust based on, this person and this person might be from the same social group, whether they're from the same CrossFit gym or they're from the same church, so they're from the same whatever, and they assume a level of trust that may not actually be accurate or helpful, and they're not starting someone kind of at zero in that space.
And if I'm in deficit, that is a skewed dynamic.
What do you mean by deficit?
Well, if I have relational problems in my family, okay, I'm going to import those core beliefs to whatever expectations I have to someone else.
Okay.
So if I'm trying too hard to prove that I'm good enough from a family that told me I wasn't good enough,
right.
then all of a sudden I'm ratcheted up. I am emotionally hyper vigilant about what I need to do to prove myself worthy. And I immediately transfer all my trust to someone because I'm in deficit.
Right.
And I'm trying to compensate for my deficit by giving you more power. So let me just hand you all of my power, hand you all of my trust, hand you all of my... And all of a sudden, we're in this interesting relationship where I'm expecting you to do something that you have no idea that I have that expectation. And maybe our values could be completely different when it comes to relationship.
Yeah, and that person might not even be able to fulfill those expectations, in the first place.
Don't even know what they are until we actually can have conversation, and we just come. And unfortunately, I'd love to think that everybody out there has no deficits, but most people bring both deficits to the table.
Right.
And we're both trying to figure out how do we have a relationship when we're both struggling with certain core beliefs or identity issues or deficits or other things within us that may not be healthy to begin with.
Right, right. So sticking with our kind of dating example, particularly with the internet these days and all the apps and things, a lot of times people are moving particularly quickly through relationships, whether it's, it's a weird like kind of currency or commodity almost. That's how apps like Tinder and certain things like that, where you're just swiping and kind of picking what you want. And then a lot of that is sexually charged. So that's kind of how that gets acted out. But, let's just put down some assumptions of like, we have two people that actually want to be in a healthy relationship. They're in a dating scenario, and they come from like a reasonable background of, reasonable's the normative amount of family legacy issues. Like what are the healthy progression? What does a healthy progression through that relational integrity spectrum kind of look like? And maybe we want to spend some time talking about what the relational integrity spectrum is.
Right.
And what family legacies are. I don't know if people listening know exactly what that means.
That's true too.
Yeah. I think that that's a whole lot of issues right there. That's about 10 counseling sessions that I've typically taken some people through. I think that the idea of family legacies, let's identify that first, is the interesting realities that all of our families bring us into this world and move us to adulthood through a process of giving us certain kinds of values. There's also interesting messages. So, for instance, if I have in my family a parent who might be unhealthy or an alcoholic, as an example, I'm going to have the need to care for them. If I have a mom who's sick, I'm going to have a need to care for them. So my role as a child and the brain wiring that goes on in me is really featured towards my parenting my parents.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And then there's all the messages that parents give you. I used to coach Little League, and one of the things that the coaches did, they would always tell the kids, if you don't do this right, you'll never be a good ball player. Okay, think about that in life. If you don't pass math right, if you don't do your chores right, you'll never be. Well, there's this chronic sense of thinking and parenting. If I use intimidation or negative consequences to motivate you, that you're going to jump up and do everything I want you to do. Well, sometimes that just leaves us with a message of it doesn't matter. Whatever I do is never going to be good enough.
Yeah.
If I bring that type of value to the table of a relationship, then obviously I'm proving myself to you as worthy, because I believe that my core belief about me is that I am unworthy automatically when we start the relationship. Now I am in deficit to you. Those are very common things that happen. If there's dysfunction in the family, I'm going to bring that into the scenario. One of the big scenarios I see in men is a lot of insecurity.
Right.
They come in, and because men have this expectation that there are no tools you need for relationships, except the obvious ones, but I don't have to work at this because maybe my dad didn't work at this, and but yet I'm expected to have this interesting attractability. And what do you have in a relational dynamic if you don't know how to communicate?
Yeah.
And I don't have social, and of course, we live in a world now that's very much in deficit of social exchange because of the media that we have and the social media that we have.
Right. It's a different type of social exchange.
Definitely.
Entirely.
That's radically changed.
Yeah.
There's now information about the coming up generation that we have right now that are talking about how socially awkward.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't know how to have conversations
So
with
if
people.
I'm socially awkward because everything I've been doing is online and now I'm face to face with an actual human being, again, my legacy that I've developed of my own accord is I'm only good when I'm faceless.
Or at least have quite a bit of separation from.
I don't have to deal with your consequence.
Yep.
Right.
So I say something online and people react, I can just close the computer.
Right. Or delete the ones they don't like, pretend that they did,
Yeah.
or you know.
Get yourself in your own little echo chamber
Right.
online. Yeah.
And I can
Yeah.
live so independently and in isolation from consequences of social relationships. That's become a whole different set of problems that we are facing with people that don't have a sense of consequence. And that's part of their brain development as a child because they never really had to deal with it at a social level. So whatever we grew up in has messages to it. How well those messages have stuck with us, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but how intensely they've stuck with us just depends on how we were wired. What are those interesting moments that you went through as a child or as a teenager where that really stuck in you? And usually when people can tell me about certain incidences where something was really life impactful, that's usually a moment of imprint in the brain where all of a sudden they're realizing, every time that happens to me, this is how I'm going to react.
Yeah.
Either I'm reliving it or I'm dissociating from it or I'm, depending on how traumatic it was.
Now, you mentioned earlier you find a lot of guys that have a lot of insecurities about whatever. Do you find it challenging sometimes because a lot of what you're doing in your counseling sessions is conveying that to some degree, like being social and having relationships, there's a skill component to it, which means you can actually get better at it with practice.
Right.
But if people don't know that it's actually a skill and relationships just don't happen, like, you know what I'm saying?
That's a good point.
Like,
Yeah.
you've got to. Do you spend a lot of your time convincing people that relationships there's a skill component?
Well, the first thing usually people don't come to me because they're having a really good relationship.
Right. This is true. Fair point.
Fair point.
Or that they're doing well themselves.
Right.
Usually they come to me
Well, you're the oh shit guy. So.
well, either their expectations that are unmet, or there's some level of devastation, or someone has left someone, there's anguish, or there's so much conflict that they don't feel like they're ever going. So, yeah, but I think to your point, people seem to have some kind of expectation that we're going to plug into a relationship without any intentionality.
Yeah, automatic.
So it's I'm a guy, I'm a great guy, you're a great girl, so it ought to work. But again, we don't take into consideration male-female stuff. We don't take into consideration legacy, different family legacies. We don't even understand our situation. We just think, hey, we can come together, and because there's a physical attraction and we can move through the physicality of our relationship, that the relational piece is automatically going to work.
Right.
And it isn't that way. So there is a sense of saying, why don't we do a rewind and let's go back to the moment that you started your relationship. What did you see now related to the deficits that you see now? I have not met a woman yet who couldn't tell me verbatim. I have met some men that had no clue. Well, I thought this.
Everything was fine.
I was just really good, and I just thought she liked me. And I get a little bit of that from some of the men. Other men did know that while I met her mother, and I was looking at that, and I went, whoa, I'm not sure. But there's usually a hint that there were some interesting things that we shouldn't have ignored.
Yeah.
Right.
And that brings us to this idea of what is the sequence of building a relationship that's important.
Yep.
And there's where I use the term, I use the relational integrity grid that I paint with people to say, I think this is a pretty important sequence.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get into all kinds of neurological detail, but people just want to get what are the basics of understanding this. If you think about that, and rarely have I asked people to give me a relational integrity list, meaning what kind of attributes do you want in this other person? When you're having an emotional connection with someone, when you're having a relationship with someone, what is it that you're looking for? There is your first template, your first thing that you start with. We don't start with, do I trust them and do I entrust myself to them?
Right.
Without any
Yeah,
understanding of what these... Now, some people do it intuitively, but for those that don't, or those that find themselves in deficit, it's amazing what people miss. So the basic ones I get are, and these are usually universal.
Yeah.
Respect. Do they accept me for who I am? Are they kind? Do they have any sense of compassion? Are they mindful? Are they in tune with my emotions? Are they positive people? Are they hopeful? One that often gets missed that I think is rather interesting is, will they resolve their own issues on their own terms?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Because often they will bring their issues to you and expect you to resolve them.
Yeah.
Do they create safety for you? So,
And for themselves.
yeah. And then we ask the word, do they love you? A whole lot of issues come out of that.
Yeah.
But unconditional acceptance, again, becomes one of the big issues, is do they love you for who you are, or do they love you for who they think they can make you to be?
Big difference.
And if we go into a relationship with that one, which is often the case, well, they have this and this and this, but I think I can solve that. Joke.
Yeah. Highly
It really
unlikely.
depends on how steeped they are and where the legacies are. Remember, one of the things about legacies is that we're very loyal to them
Right.
because we were reared with them.
Yeah,
So
it's your family shit, man.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
because my family said this is the right value to have,
Yeah.
or even my church said this is the right value to have because God said it when in fact it isn't.
Right, right.
If other people out there that are very influential in my life have said this is what you are going to be, even
You could be
your
teacher,
coach, first boyfriend, first girlfriend, could be
Oh,
any
yeah.
of those folks
Hugely impactful.
that have said this is what I want you to be, and you're really struggling with that, and you try to be it to everyone.
Yeah.
It transfers to every relationship you have with a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
So there's where all of a sudden these values don't matter. Other agendas matter. And if we don't know that stuff, then we really don't know what we're dating and what we're working with.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people jump into their relationships just kind of like blindly saying, oh, well, it'll work out. They don't look what you're saying to this list here of attributes. They're just saying, well, I love this person. I really like this person. They love me back, and it'll all be fine, without exactly what you said, without any sense of intentionality behind that.
And Serena, what are you saying when you're saying that'll work out?
That'll work out. Things are going to be fine.
But why would it be?
I know. Why would it be?
And who are you looking to fix it?
The other person.
Yeah, when they're both looking to the other
Yep.
person. Or if I think it's going to work out, this is a woman's story all the time. Well, I think if I get him married, I'll fix this.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
I know he's got this horrific set of. I'll fix this, and the guy's going, fix what?
Right.
You don't
I
need
like
to
me
fix
how I
this.
am.
I'm fine. What do you mean? You don't. Now we get to. She's saying I can fix it. I'm saying I'm okay for who I am, or vice versa. He's saying, well, I'll marry her and we'll figure this out. You know, and she's going, there wasn't anything to figure out. And why don't you love me for who I was then? Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
It gets interesting, and it starts with just basic core beliefs and my expectations coming into the world of relationships, thinking that I can make the world the way I think it should be, instead of, and usually there aren't necessarily emotionally healthy principles like I just listed. So
Right. So then you have the beginning framework was kind of like your pre-launch checklist of relational integrity, where it's, are they honest? Are they loving? Are they, do they have the attributes you're kind of looking for? And this can even not be in a romantic setting. It can be in any relationship.
Right.
Absolutely.
You're going to
For
want
sure.
some baseline, like, whether it's a work relationship or a new friendship, whatever.
Absolutely.
It's
sure.
it's obviously, if it's romantic, you're going to have a little bit more like are we compatible with certain other things, where if you were looking for like a golfing buddy, that's a different expectation. But there's still elements of trust, honesty, transparency, some level of like you're going to handle your own stuff and solve your own issues. So once you have, let's say, like mined all your P's and Q's and check those boxes, then what's the next level on that grid, on that spectrum?
And this brings us to another value, but also it starts leading us to whether or not I begin to trust this person. Fair give and take.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Is the relationship all give by me and all take by them? Is it all take by me and give by? If that's going on, we know that there is a temporary timeline for that relationship, because it won't last that long, and it certainly won't be healthy.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. Yeah.
So we're automatically, if we're not expecting fair give and take in our integrity grid, then we actually are going to have a difficult time. But what does fair give and take mean? Well, it means that we're looking at each other through the lens of our relational integrity grid. And what we're saying is, oh, this person, as soon as they had a problem, they went and solved it. Or they've never solved a problem in their whole life. Because we're having problems, and they don't do one thing. When I say, is this a problem for you? No.
Or they fall to pieces.
Or I'm devastated because you set them up. How dare? There's a lot of ways for people to push you back from problem resolution. Or if they're not kind, if you watch them being nice to you and unkind to everyone else, then you're going, whoa, there's not a core belief in there. If they're not honest, so they'll lie to everybody but you, and you think that they're, you see that they come to you, and in a vulnerable moment, they tell you about how horribly relationships have been messed up. Have they ever fixed that, gotten help with that? Yeah. That's one I find big time.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is say, now I'm looking at this grid, and I'm looking at the issue of trust. What do I trust? Well, anything that builds with any degree of integrity and consistency means that these issues, these core beliefs, are going to happen consistently over time. So, if someone's never late to a meeting, well, after a while you trust the fact that they're always prompt. So you'll know against that value that if they're not right there, there's something that went wrong.
Right. You know that has broken trust for an important reason, not just because they're flaky.
Right. So the issue is, if it's just, I use on time because that's an easy thing to measure. Are you there on time or not? The other relational values are a little harder, but if someone is only kind in certain moments, or if they get angry at you at the drop of a pen, if you begin to go, whoa, I'm not going to trust over time. So if you look at all those attributes that you have decided are important to you, you probably will have pinpoints on graphs that are different on each of those issues.
Right.
So you might have someone who's consistently kind, who accepts you for who they are, that is a complete liar.
Right.
And then you go and you see, well, wait a minute, they don't solve their lying problem. And of course, if they happen to be using medications of varied sorts to regulate themselves, you know that they're not responsible for their own regulation without help. So that means there's something else. And this is the stuff that people see all the time and they ignore.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't see it as a problem. That's like, oh, that red flag, let's just pull the flag away and pretend it doesn't exist.
Because I want to have a relationship, or because I am attracted to this person, or because I envision whatever.
These other attributes that are happy are fine.
It's significant. When you see a red flag, as Serina just called it, you need to say, what's behind the red flag?
Yep.
Why is it waving? There is a danger sign there.
Red flag for me is if they're really mean to wait staff.
That's a really
that's
big
where I'm
one.
like, whoa.
Yeah. And it's when you're dating someone and you have that relational integrity grid in your head, it's really number one, it's really hard to have a good relationship at that point because you're always measuring. But when you're watching that go on and you say, wow, I'm noticing these and these and these types of values or core beliefs or violations, at that point, it's not a reason to break the relationship, but it's a way to measure your own trust.
Right. You can only
Therefore,
trust them but so far.
You're guarding your own emotions.
Mm-hmm.
You're guarding the impact of what they can do to you. You're guarding the consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty healthy thing to do because, and we think, well, that feels a little selfish. Not really. Because if you value the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
there are moments where you say, on this area, we're going to
Mm-hmm.
part ways and agree to disagree, but the other areas, we're going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm jiu-jitsu class, I'll roll with you, you know, that's fine, but we're not going to go out afterwards
Right.
because you treat people awfully.
Right.
And so what I mean, so that you can have all kinds of different relationships with all kinds of different aspects in business. You know, yeah, you're a great technician. I'll let you handle my air conditioning every day. And I know that it's going to be done well, and you're fair in your pricing, and you're going to do a good job. But are we going to go out and you know, go out and have social engagement and have dinner? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Because that's not a forum that I trust. And that's okay.
So you can have different people fall into different categories.
Exactly.
When you want, in an ideal setup, you want to have your prerequisites, and then you watch your counterpart in the relationship meet those prerequisites for a pretty decent amount of time. So they're demonstrating some consistency. And then, you know, as that consistency gets demonstrated, you start to build more trust in that person. But with that trust starts to build expectations. So like the example where the person's always on time, you just kind of start always assuming they're going to be on time.
And that's what I call the entrustment phase. That's where I say, I can entrust that part of me to you.
Yeah.
Now this is getting more intimate. This is getting more reliable. This is getting deeper. You know, I think that if someone is consistently the same to me, I will then say, I've seen this over 18 months. And by the way, personnel literature tells us it takes 2 years to know someone.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
So I think
Is that
a
best
lot of
case?
time.
Is that best case scenario?
I know people that get engaged in 3 months.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
do too.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and you go, whoa.
Yeah.
Pump the
I've seen
brakes.
that.
Hope this works out.
Pump the brakes.
But I think that it really does happen over time. And I think before I say I really will entrust my daily life to you or this aspect to you, there needs to be a season of time where it's been measured. And then once we have, and part of the dynamic is someone that you are having relationship with, you can say to them, this is the impact on me when you do that. When you do that, when you say that, when I see this, it has this effect on me. And if they are compassionate and care about you, they will begin to talk through that with you and say, well, maybe I need to assess it, see where it's coming from in me, what happened to me that I do this, and be willing to start trying to work on it and resolve it.
Right. As opposed to getting angry and leaving the relationship entirely, you're saying that's where you've got some trust built, some of that relational integrity there to say, hey, this is where I see your inconsistency.
Right.
And the other person reciprocates by saying, wow, yeah, I can see what you mean. This is not very good. Let's see if we can resolve this.
Right.
As
Right.
opposed to like, okay, well, see
Yeah.
you later. I'm out of the picture.
Or I'm angry at you for saying it.
Yeah.
Why would you ever say that to me? And off we go.
Right.
So I think in the process, we are looking for, before we get to that entrustment phase, we really need to see trust over time
Yeah.
in those particular characteristics.
And that's why I feel like sometimes that's why we get really hurt by friends. If we've had friends, I've had friends for a long time who are fairly consistent. And then one time something happens, we'll use the time as an example. It's like, okay, well, where were you? You were 2 hours late. And it was just because they forgot, or, it wasn't anything malicious, or they just didn't want to come, whatever it is. Then you start losing a little bit of trust in that area, but it's not totally shattered because you have had some of that built up over time.
Right. And this is paradigm two, and the place where it gets to be really important is when we do parenting and our kids break trust. Okay, the curfew was midnight. I came in at 3 a.m. What did we do? Do we be punitive? You'll never date again. No, we make them earn trust back. You've broken trust. We make it we earn it back. And there's the skill that we see so much missing
Yeah.
in our young adult population, and sometimes our old adult population. You don't think there's a need to rebuild it. Let's just move on. Well, if trust is broken, that's important. And I need to figure out, okay, can I earn your trust back? Is a great question. And that tells you that I care about whether you trust me or not. Or do I say, oh, you don't trust me? So what do so I can never be? I'll never. Well, that's going to be that defensive, insecure response that says, I'm not sure I'm capable to change, or I shouldn't have to change.
Or I shouldn't have to change.
All of a sudden, we're no longer fair give and take.
Right. And that's particularly sticky when you've had, like particularly in a marriage, when a level of trust is automatically, it's assumed. So they say like, okay, we're basically entrusted to each other now. No matter what happens, we're in it. And then you have someone that breaks one of those core tenets that we talked about with the, relational integrity spectrum. And then that person that's violated it just automatically assumes that you're going to keep trusting them. It's like, no, it doesn't mean the relationship's over. We got to
rebuild that.
We got to back up to this grid here and say like, no, you have to demonstrate to me again over time and reestablish some of these check boxes that we talked about, like honesty, trustworthiness, all this stuff, before we get you back into the trust category.
Yeah, I think that often the commitment that people assume in a marriage is interesting. Some people look at the vows. Now, honestly, did you really know what you were committing to when you said these vows? In thick and thin and life and death and all, whatever your vows were, I will love you forever. Did you anticipate really what that means? And the answer is no.
No one knows.
You don't know what that
looks like.
the extremes are. You're saying I'm going to love you in each extreme. It's like, well,
4 a.m. with 2 babies crying. It just doesn't work.
Be like, dude, I haven't been into deep water yet. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, and the reality is there is an experience at that level. So it's interesting when we make these commitments, and then people try to legalistically hold you to those commitments, like you did this and you. But so much of that process is realizations that you didn't have when you were 21 or 25 or 28. 21, your brain still hasn't figured out its wiring yet. So in the process, there's a lot that we assume that we can entrust ourselves to that really isn't there.
Right.
And, there are times where I'd even ask some people, like, what were you thinking? Did you think that...
I wasn't
thinking.
Well, I mean, you knew this.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, I knew this going down the aisle.
Yeah.
I knew this was a problem, and I did it anyway. Why? Because some other force out there was saying, well, you've come this far.
Yep.
And you need to continue it. And then once you say your values, your vows, that becomes the whole relationship. Well, that didn't anticipate 98% of the things that you're going to run into.
Right.
And not to say that we shouldn't have resilience and love anyway and all of that, but I think we're clueless about the level of conflict that could create that really puts you in a real bad state. And it can be triggering all the time. I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago that had a chronic problem in their relationship, and I asked a couple of questions and said, well, how much has this been happening? And they said, our whole marriage. So I asked the spouse, well, is there been a time where this happened in your childhood? Yes. Yeah. And what I found out that this has been going on in this person's life as a child, which was devastating. And every time the spouse did something close to it, that's where they went. They had lived into their 50s with marital conflict over this issue. Now, God loved them. They've stayed together.
Yeah.
But the other spouse, when they finally saw their spouse go, oh, I get it, almost fell on the floor saying, thank you. We finally got the point
Yep.
of what was creating this massive emotional problem in our relationship. It's just what they didn't realize.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they didn't know. They just didn't know. And it took a moment to say that. So it's interesting because there's also on the entrustment side things you don't know.
Right.
And there's where you've got to go through a lot of discovery process. You know, yes, I'll love you forever. Yes, we're attracted to each other. Yes, we have this nice, quick plan to get married and live in our apartment or a condo or a house. And we've done our own version of Little House on the Prairie, and it's all good.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, then we've realized there's another person in deficit that I'm hooked up with,
Yep.
and this is not good.
Well,
Yeah.
I was talking to my aunt last week about this. I was like, I feel like as a society, we should stop having some of the celebrations that we have, because it's like weddings, particularly in our culture, have gotten like out of control with like how much, this is just my opinion, how much like fanfare there is. And it's like no one, if you say I'm getting married, everyone usually like thumbs up. It's like a third base coach just like waving you home. And we have these massive parties where people spend ungodly
much
sums of
money.
money on there to celebrate it. And everyone's like, great, it's going to be awesome. Enjoy your honeymoon, like all that stuff. And there's all these parties leading up to the wedding. And then you take these very serious vows that no one really even reads, maybe to the the day of maybe. But it's like, I feel like it should be more of like a somber send off. Like these people are going to go climb Everest. Like it should be more like they may not come back. Like that's not like.
Well, the 57% divorce rate, that's probably
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
But
it is
but
true.
there's a lightness to it where it's almost like not taking it seriously. It's like this messes people up, man. Like I don't know. I was joking a lot about it, but it was just kind of there's not like the gravity to it. And now there's all this, it's your day and you're the princess and spend all this money. And you know what? I think you should have a great day and whatever, but I almost think the wedding should come like 15 years in when you've already like
You mean the
seen some
party.
shit and like scaled a few mountains. You're like, yeah, we
made
did
it through
We
that.
made it through some
we
of
made
it.
through. Yeah. I mean, I think the commitment to the wedding event is the big temptation in that.
Yeah.
This thing, when you spend $30,000 for a day,
That's the low end, man.
and you are going to have all this stuff happen, and people, what choice do you have
Yeah.
at the last minute to say,
No
maybe
thanks.
not? I actually had somebody come to me and say, happened to be the guy, I don't think I want to marry her.
How close to the wedding?
1 week.
Mm.
Week and a half, I think, before the ceremony. Everything was already paid.
Yep, I bet.
Dress was bought. They had bought a house.
Oh my.
And the guy comes to me and says, I don't think I want to marry her. I don't want to marry her. I said, I said,
okay.
that's a little rough. So
Yeah.
There's no smooth exit on that one, dude.
So he actually went and told her
Wow.
and brought her into my office. And we were having, I don't know what to call it.
How was that?
It was
A session.
It was a conflictual set of moments.
Yeah.
She was livid.
I bet.
It was a little awkward. That's
So, but listen to what happened. They decided that it would be better to just go ahead and go through with the wedding.
Oh no.
So they went through with the wedding. From what I remember about it, he started in the morning with medicating. And he was pretty drunk by the time the
Yeah.
ceremony happened.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to remember that
I
either.
think that she picked up on that, and what I believe happened, if I remember correctly, is that he ended up with some facial wounds
Oh my goodness.
from a strike, and they went, and the week of the honeymoon, they went and got it annulled.
Wow.
But the point I'm making is not to give that drama, because I've got plenty of stories. But
Yeah.
but I think in the process, the commitment to the ceremony
Yeah. That's
became
crazy.
more important than the couple's relationship, and that's alarming.
Yeah.
Right.
But in a very subtle way, I think that's what happens. Once you start
lot of
planning the
times.
momentum, and you're now in the most serious phase of contemplating, during your engagement, of contemplating a life together, and the intensity of planning and comes forward, and all of a sudden you're feeling all this pressure to entrust yourself to situations, and you get into the other family. And then you see, ooh, wow, this is my life. What do we do?
Yeah.
And that can get really hard for some situations.
For sure.
And you don't have a bailout strategy that isn't going to cost people a whole lot of time, energy, money, and
Emotional energy,
embarrassment
too.
in terms of what it is and all the stuff that we have centered. So to make your point, Jeremy,
Yeah.
the marriage, the wedding process is very interesting, but the commitment to the event begins to shape our relational integrity or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And then often couples the next week after the wedding wake up and go, who are you?
Yeah. What is
And
this
what
I
did
just
just happen?
got stuck to?
And what are we? And people don't like each other now because of
Yeah.
families, and off we go.
Well, a lot of times
Yeah.
it's like the first gauntlet in the relationship. It's the first hard thing, the
True.
first super
That is
stressful
true.
thing they went through is
Right.
to get through a wedding, which
Right.
to me is insane.
Brings
Like,
the whole family together. All the legacies are pouring out. Everything's happening on the
Yeah.
going, whoa, what's going on?
culturally, as soon as you start dating, they go, when are you going to get engaged?
Right.
And then as soon as you get engaged, it's like, when's the wedding?
Right.
And then when you get married, it's like, well, when do you have kids?
Right.
And then once you have kids, they're like, I don't care about you anymore.
Good luck with that mess.
but there is this conveyor belt, almost like this,
Yeah.
this like just you can just on ramp immediately into like engagement, and then there is something every step of the way till you cross that line of,
Right.
and they treat the finish line like the wedding is the finish line. I'm like, that's just the start, kid.
No,
That's
no.
not.
Yeah.
That's the easy part.
Well, it removes all the relational processing from it.
Because the event becomes the focus.
Right. So we're not processing a relationship. We're moving to the next goal.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that may work, great for a manufacturing firm.
Well,
but
it's
it
working
really
great for the
doesn't-
wedding industry and anybody attached to that.
Yeah, but it doesn't really work for two people trying to create relational integrity over time.
Yeah. Have it be sustainable.
Yeah. I like going back a little bit. We were talking about fair giving and taking. I think that is taken for granted with a lot of relationships. A lot of my friends, even clients of mine, I hear people tell these stories, and you sit there and you say, this is so heavily weighted one way or the other. Like, what are you going to do about that? And so much of the time, now I mostly have friends who are females. Most of the time, the female is doing a whole lot of giving, and then they get nothing in return. And I say, well, what are you going to do about that?
Right.
Nothing. They just do nothing. They're happy to do nothing because that's what they're used to, some sort of legacy issue or what have you. And I did want to point to say that there are times and phases where you have one person who gives more than the other person. Like when I was really sick, you gave a ton to me. And I was like, well, thank you. I'll take all of it. But now we're back to a point of better balance, right?
I also knew what I was more or less knew what I was doing. And I knew it was a phase. It was not something that was like, this is how I always want to do it. So,
But that is life too.
Right. It's not fair, perfectly fair all the time.
Correct.
It's fair over time because
Correct.
there might be a period where you're really, really giving a whole lot and your spouse is not. They need you to give a whole lot and then you kind of reverse, and that's totally okay. But when you see this skewed forever, months and months and months and months, years, that's a problem.
Well, when people become hopeless and powerless and it lasts for a long time, usually their health is affected. As you have seen in the nutrition world, their nutrition is affected, and you're looking at all kinds of other things like cortisol releases in the body, which is destructive to organs and everything else. And we know from the trauma world that chronic stress over time has the same impact in the brain as trauma. And one of the big moments of big understandings of that over time is a really bad relationship. So if you don't do this well, it can really mess you up.
Absolutely.
As Jeremy would say.
Yeah.
So.
that's about the kindest way to put that.
Yeah.
It's just, I think relational health is something that doesn't get enough attention. And then, I read quite a bit, and then it's a lot of, they look at like, what's your morning routine like? What's all of this? And then now they're just starting to hit on the fringe of maybe we should look at
relationships.
What does it
people.
look like to have a healthy relationship?
Exactly.
And then how to do that in a sustainability is something that as I've gotten slightly older and moderately more wise of like what I'm looking at, like, okay, does this play out over the next 40 years? Like, can I sustain this? And like one of the things we were kind of going through the relational integrity spectrum, and I think you started touching on entrustment, which is kind of the deepest level of that spectrum. Like, in a marriage, hopefully you get to the point where you're entrusting yourself to your spouse and them entrusting themselves to you as well. But barely anyone makes it to that level. So for guys, I remember the stats, like this is many years ago, so I could be wrong, but like guys really only get to entrustment with maybe 2, maybe 3 people. And then women have the social capacity to do maybe like 4 or 5 of like super, super really close, deep friends, where guys, it's like usually less than that. Is that still true kind of from what you guys have observed?
Well, and we're making the assumption that because you have friends, you have entrustment.
Well, I just meant like...
I'm just saying that right. What I find, even with guys who have their 2 to 3, if wrong things happen, all of a sudden it gets to be interesting. And women the same way. You think you have these friends, and all of a sudden a big issue comes up. Yeah. Because I've watched it happen. They've got this core of friends, and all of a sudden some blow up happens. Yeah. And rather than resolving it in a very positive way, there's this departure, all of a sudden, and so I'm so hurt, and I'm so this, and I'm so that. So there hasn't been the intentional sharing of what we're creating with each other. So I haven't had communication. We've just made assumptions, and an assumption can often mimic entrustment. So I'm assuming that because we're hanging together, that you've handled this issue. Well, I might not even know that you have this issue because the context in which we're hanging has nothing to do with that issue. Right. So when, like for instance, if I have a really, really good friend and all of a sudden they do something bizarre, you're shattered. Whoa, that I didn't see that coming, well, was there ever any discussion about that issue? And I'm not saying you should discuss all the potential awful things that can happen, but but a
long discussion.
But what's the leanings? When we look at things like active shooters, they were throwing out messages all the time, and the people around them just went and often our friends are throwing out messages all the time, and because of our commitment to the friendship, we don't stop and say, whoa, I'm observing this about you. Can you explain more of that to me? And there's the interesting piece when you stand in the entrustment place. Is there the ability to communicate about differences, conflicts, and those kinds of things? Because that really is the stick point. That's when you really can entrust yourself to someone. When I can say, Serina, I'm having this problem with you, and you say, wow, I want to hear that. I'm going to listen to that, and I'm going to figure out what I can do in our relationship. Or I'm going to say, I can do nothing about that because of, unmovable issues. Or I can't do anything about it right now, or I'm working on it, or what. But when you get there with somebody, now we're close to that moment where trust over time has manifested itself in problem exploration and resolution. And we're really good if we go through 3 or 4 sequences of that.
Yeah.
Right. Because then now you have a much more robust relationship.
It's deeper, wider, longer, more intimate, and more transparent. And the authenticity is the piece that makes that thing stick. It's sort of at the trust level, that's sort of the basics of saying, I see this over time, and therefore I am trusting it more. But we just have to remember, this is on a continuum. Right. It doesn't, no one can hold muster all the time and be perfect at all of these issues. Right. I'm going to have bad days. I'm going to have ups and downs. So the issue of relational integrity is not a hard, fast, limbic type of scenario where it's all black and white. But we're looking at the patterns over time to see if you are willing to connect to me, even at the cost of some of the things that you think are really, really essential to your life, but you're willing to give a little bit over to the person you're having a relationship, because that's fair give and take. So I think it's a good point when you talk about the entrustment piece is that fair give and take is really measurable at that moment because we work through it.
Right.
Right.
In a marriage, in a life, and whatever. We work through fair give and take, and we're still standing in a trusting point that says, I believe in you versus I trust you. There's just a little bit of difference in there.
Yeah, for sure.
And I believe that you're going to care for me in this process. That means we've had some tests and trials and conflicts.
Yeah. Well, I think some of it, I mean, you mentioned kind of the ability to kind of think through things. In the past with, some of the relationships that have kind of jumped up and bit me.
Yeah.
It was just because I didn't have it in my head that I had the capacity to do what the other person did to me, that I just didn't think it was an option.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I grew up very spoiled relationally where I had super nice parents. Josh, my brother, was and our close family was very kind to each other, very respectful, all that. So I just kind of assumed that's how everybody was. And then I moved out into the world just all right. And then and I was like, hey, I'm Jeremy. I'm a nice fella. And then they're just like, yeah. I'm like, how? Why? Why would you do that? Oh, life hurts so bad.
I know.
But and that's nothing to do. I very much enjoyed but it was just I didn't think of it.
Yeah.
And it was looking
So
back. I was
blindsided you a
was
little
so
bit.
stupid. I had that with employees where I just kept, I just assumed they would act how I would act if I were them. You know what I mean? That's how else would I? And then they turn into being a huge dick. And I was like,
Right.
wow, how I wouldn't even have thought to do that.
Yeah.
Nor would I have thought that you would have thought to
right.
do that. And then you did it. And then it's,
Hey, then trust was broken and you've got to rebuild it.
well, you rebuild it. But then one of the things that
Or you don't.
you've discussed with me too is that on your relational integrity spectrum, Serena's got her own spectrum and I have mine. And if we were, obviously we are in a relationship with each other, but we don't necessarily we don't have to line up and be in the exact same place at the exact same
right,
time.
exactly.
And that was a new concept to me, where if you meet a new friend and you meet at the gym and then they're like, oh, it's a nice guy, I might want to have beers or whatever. They might put you in their trust category way before.
Yes.
And I might still have him you're still kind of going through the prereqs, man. I don't trust you for shit. We're still moving that along, but they don't necessarily line up.
I think that's what's hard. I think that's really the hard point because people say, well, if we drink together, I trust you.
That's about the dumbest way to trust.
I
Yeah,
know.
that is.
well, isn't that the truth? But honestly, we are made for relationship. We are made for connection. And if I don't really have much of a connection with anyone because I've really pushed everyone away from me by my own deficits, you say, I'm isolated, I am alone, and you say, hey, that was fun rolling. Why don't we go out for drinks? You become my magnet. For relationship.
Right.
And all of a sudden, now if you're coming from a healthy place and I'm coming from an unhealthy place, the expectations for what trust and entrustment is totally different. And so I'm going to entrust myself to you because you ask me out. What? No. But it does say to me, I am appreciated. This person likes me. They want to be with me.
Right.
And for some individuals, that's more than they've ever had in their life.
Right.
So it's really interesting to be in the world with, as you say, Jeremy, some sense of this is how people should treat people. And I have this interesting relational integrity grid of my own that I think the world is going to embrace, and they don't.
Yeah.
And that's what is interesting. And often I tell people, if you really operate the way that I'm talking to you right now, you almost feel like you're on a bit of an island. Because you're looking at the world through a lens. And the lens gets to this interesting intensity about observation that goes, whoa, no, what, yeah, You're almost ducking, weaving, bobbing, and flinching as to what you're seeing going on. And even if it's not aimed at you.
Right.
I was telling Jeremy this morning, I was driving a car today, and I actually watched two people have a fist fight in the front of the car.
While they were driving.
While they were driving.
And they were wailing on each other and having arguments and screaming, and I think there were kids in the back.
Wow.
And I couldn't see much because they were slamming on the brakes and weaving all over the road, and I was
so dangerous.
concerned about everybody on the road. and saying, wow, what must be going on?
Yeah.
And these people are apparently involved in a relationship, and they have begun to use violence as a way to communicate. And I'm just going, good gracious. But that is part of our world.
Right.
Road rage always shocks me. That's one. I've never been to the point. I've certainly been as miffed at some drivers as anybody else, but I've never thought that I should shoot them.
Right.
Well, you know,
Right.
there's a lot of science. There's a guy who wrote a book called Traffic, and he was a PhD doctor. I forget if it was neurochemistry or not, whatever his discipline was, but I believe he's a clinical psychologist. And he's like, what is going on with road rage? And he did all these studies. The book is just about traffic and
That's
what it does
amazing.
on humans.
Wow.
So it's incredibly long.
Right.
But so I won't bore you with all the details. Basically, as you drive, you're speeding up. So as humans throughout our history, driving is a relatively new thing. So if you're at speed, you're either running from something, you're falling, which means you're going to die, or there's some element of danger involved if you're moving that quickly. So your brain clicks into hypervigilance.
Right.
And then if any minor aggression, part of our brain knows that if I mess up right now, I'm dead. So any slight, and then guys, it's usually males that get into like road rage, like the pull a gun out, shoot somebody. They're so jacked of like, no, I'm gonna kill you. Like there's actually a psychological reason why road rage exists, and then it's even more important to be observer kind of in that and tone things down and be like, okay,
Right.
just need to like take a few breaths, be mindful. But it's also important to know like other people are jacked up. Then also if you input whatever music they're listening to, if they've had a stressful day, are they
Playing
surfing stuff on their phone?
That is my
which
biggest. I hate it. Every time I see someone on their phone, I wag my finger at them.
Yeah.
Don't do that. And I don't want to think I'm flipping them off or anything like
Yeah.
that. But I'd like not to. But I'm like, you are being so reckless right now. That really pisses me off.
Yeah.
A
So
lot.
anyway, we'll bring it back to relationships. Just be careful on the roads, guys. Don't have a fist fight. At least, geez, pull over.
Yeah,
pull over. Settle that.
They pulled over in the turn lane.
There,
Yeah, right.
Hey,
that's
at least
not pulled over. That's in the turn lane.
they came to a stop. That's good. Well, and I just want to bring it back to the whole. As you said, once you start looking at things like this, it becomes a little challenging where you feel like, I'm not going to have any friends. Like that's kind of how you end up feeling. But one of the ways I started looking at it when you kind of laid this out, and we've been talking a lot about it over the years, is that the spectrum as experienced by me is directly correlated to my level of expectation of other people.
Right.
So if it's a stranger, I have no relational integrity with that person. My expectations of what they may or may not do are dramatically different than my expectations of my brother.
Right.
So, I used this example before when I've tried to explain this to people. I'm like, look, if my brother stole my truck, I'd be super pissed. Like, be like, dude, you freaking stole you're like, I know you. You're like my boy. Like, what are we doing? Versus if a stranger stole my truck, I would still be pissed, but I'm like, I don't had any expectation.
There was no personal slight.
Dick.
No broken trust.
Yeah, there's no broken trust there. And so there was no, my relational integrity, grid was not affected, whereas my brother did. It would be a massive break in trust. We'd have to, figure out what the heck happened and reestablish all those things. But, that's just, so it's more of the severity or the just the amount of expectations there are behind people. That's kind of how I view it. It helps me kind of navigate those waters without feeling just going to be stuck on a rock by myself for the rest of my life. So
I think when people first hear this, that's kind of what they do think.
Yeah.
They think there's no way I'm ever going to have friends ever again.
Yeah.
Because I can't trust anyone all the time. And I get that. That's not the point.
Yeah.
Yeah. The point is to have a level of protection. I mean, I've often said, I don't mind being abused as long as I know it.
yeah,
Because if you deal with people, there are people that come into your space. I'm sure you see it, Serina, when you're doing nutrition. You see it in the contracting business, Jeremy, where people, they come and, from the beginning, this is going to be an interesting experience. Yep. And you have the relationship at whatever level you can. You're never going to trust it. And it might be a situation where I'm going to help somebody in spite of themselves. Obviously, we do that in the counseling And
Yeah.
Behavioral management and even educational world, we help people that most people would think don't deserve it, but if we don't, they become a liability to society. So I don't mind if the stranger steals my truck and I realize, well, that's what they do, and I'll figure out my reaction to that, but I'm not in broken trust
Right.
over that. And I think that we have to have some level of, but the awareness level is completely different.
Right.
And I think that's what I'm rooting for here. I'm really trying to say that we need to be intentional, even at the emotional and relational level with people, to understand that what we create can either victimize us or give us great, deep, wonderful friendships. And
Right.
so the measure of how that works out is how we establish this fair give and take integrity with each other. The point is not to have an elimination list.
Right.
The point is to create good things. And when you have fought to create something really good with someone and they are not going to do it no matter what because of their own legacies, it isn't my point to judge it as much as it is my point to not be victim to it and then entrust it to the point that it destroys me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a protective dynamic that I'm searching for that says, let's be intentional, like we should be with anything we do. If you do a house project and you just kind of start pulling out a hammer and swinging at stuff, that's not going to help. You got to
Right.
measure and figure out what you want to put up.
Make a plan.
Yeah.
So we do that with almost any project we do if we know it's going to be a good project. It has
Yeah.
a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. As you are going through it, if it's not working, you kind of make a shift. Well, I can't get the screw in this thing. It doesn't fit. I'm not going to try something.
Yeah.
Call a friend.
Yeah.
You work hard to make things work. Why wouldn't it be the same when you're trying to build long-term sustainable relationships?
Yeah, and that's what we've been. I mean,
Very good point.
one of the themes that is recurring on this show is creating frameworks that flourish, and this is really I think, a really healthy framework to kind of approach relationships with, because one of the things too, it's not just you can get hurt if you're doing this. One of the things you always tell me is like slow and natural. That seems to be a pretty good advice for, particularly with relationships. But for instance, if you're going around and trusting yourself really quickly to people and you put that level of trust and expectation on them, you're going to get let down a lot. You're going to get hurt a lot because your expectations are unreasonable. So this, at least from and I was someone who's very like trusting very quickly, where I got burned a lot of time, and it was my fault. It was just, I didn't know. And then, I thought everyone was nice. But that just kind of, it's definitely helped me have a proper expectation and not to get, because I think the other thing too is if you move through life, if you entrust yourself to all these people, you keep getting burned. It's very easy to get cynical and then not engage in relationship at all, because you'd be like, F this whole thing, I'm done with people.
Right.
I'm going to move to the woods and get 2 dogs, which was my original plan. So
Sorry about that.
yeah, there's still going to be 2 dogs, but
Then
Serena.
along comes Serena.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, everybody.
Hey. So yeah, and that's, I just wanted to kind of touch on that. That is, I think it's a really, really good sustainable framework to flourish,
Well,
which is
and
what we're
the-
going for here.
And the nightmares that often happen is if you get someone who is in the process of looking for people to meet their needs. We call that destructive entitlement. That's a whole long topic.
Right.
But if someone is destructively entitled and feeling like the world is there to help them, a lot of people that want to be a helper take that as a part of their identity.
Yeah.
So I'm here to serve you for all kinds of reasons. All of a sudden, it gets to chaos because you're saying to me, I have all these needs. Could you help me? I'm saying to you, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I get identity from that. And so let's go. And we start, and then it gets to be overwhelming, and everything ramps up in the wrong direction. And it's no longer fair anything. We're not
Right.
even sure where we are anymore. But the chaos overrides us, and there's no protection. It's like I'm wide open to gunfire here. I have no shields, no nothing. And
Very exposed,
We're
yeah.
just exposed and getting annihilated by the reality because there's just no healthy boundaries. So in the process, this also shapes the boundaries against the situations that may come and victimize someone. And again, I'm not against helping someone. I do it all the time, and I know I'm going to get nothing in return. That's what the care and love and community service is about. But I don't depend on those people for long-term friendships and relationships and have expectations that they're going to do anything but be the same until they actually go through their own healing process.
Right. And then I think that's a really important point too, because it's like, you know, if you felt like you could only engage with people that met all your checklists, you wouldn't be hanging out with very many people, but you could engage with, you know, almost anyone. But if it's, again, that proper level of expectation
and understanding, awareness of where they are on that scale, that's how you have people in a community. You're not, everybody in that community has the same level of expectation for everyone else. So that's being aware of that matters.
Right.
You don't just walk into it kind of like you did to say, I'm walking in where everybody has all the best interest in mind for everybody else around them. Well, that's probably not the majority of people walking around.
Highly unlikely that that's true.
Highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. So having that understanding, I have some clients, to digress a moment, who have some chronic issues with their health, nutrition problems, some lifestyle habits, and I've done everything I could possibly ever do for them, nutritionally speaking. They've got to get their community, their relationships in a better balance, in a better state before they're really going to be able to see the success that they're looking for. So I try to introduce some of these concepts and help them along, but there's only, you know, so much you can do as a nutritional therapist. I know I have a background counseling, but there's only so much you can do with that time.
It's hard when you're trying to do something else and you're having all these relational issues, but that's kind of the way the world works.
Yeah.
We're all trying to do something else with all these relationships that are kind of
Like,
nuts.
man, I really love to just build my business, but I got to deal with people.
That's
So
right.
here.
It's a people thing.
Yeah.
So I think we pretty much covered the, you know, the relational integrity spectrum. That was kind of the main focus of this episode.
Yeah.
Dad, do you have any parting words? I think we'll probably get to, we'll have you back on to do the brain state regulation one in another episode. I think.
I mean, I think that what's a beautiful thing is, as I have worked with people who have gone through this process, is they calm down. Their expectations are different. They can relax in who they are. They have a firm foundation for why they believe what they believe. We have to rewire all the legacies that have been wired into them to make them into these more healthy core beliefs. It takes them a while. It takes most people a while to move back to this space of having permission, big word, to have your own values, because the whole issue of legacies is I have somebody else's values.
Right.
And I am trying to fulfill those values, not necessarily mine. And I might even be working on the values of the person I'm having a relationship and not necessarily mine. And so, and it's always interesting because I've had people that say, oh, my needs, and this person meets my needs perfectly. And then they leave them. Well, I said, well, how about like steadfastness?
Yeah,
how about
that's a good one.
enduring? Or how about insecurity, which is why they didn't want a relationship with you in the first place. It became temporary. Oh, a month and it's over. And they were giving them hints all along that I'm leaving. I can't sustain relationships. Why are you the exception? Which was what I said to this person. Well, I thought. We've got to be intentional. You see it, it's a red flag, as Serina said. You look at it and you measure it and you say, what is this over time? And I just think that if we do this, it really gives a lot of safety, a lot of protection, an understanding of what's really going on, because it's not only awareness that we need, but we need to move to the level of understanding. That's the misnomer about growth. I can say I'm now aware. That's not much. Okay, I got it that you're angry. Why are you angry?
Right, different thing. Yeah.
It could be a long pathological history of anger.
Yeah.
Have you dealt with that anger over time? Because I know eventually I'm going to be the recipient of that anger. And then have I seen you practice changing it? So have I seen moments where you should be angry and you have learned to balance your own brain? and be regulated and come out of it with another conclusion? And have you reflected on this well enough to know what other issues have contributed this? And have I seen you go through steps of growth? Because if there isn't understanding and if there isn't clarity and there isn't the work to change, then basically the trust will never really happen, and the entrustment should never happen. This is about protection. And all the devastation that we see out here in people's lives that we're trying to prevent. We should have lenses for this and have clarity on this. And you do that by beginning to start with your own relational integrity grid that you develop over time with people in fair give and take relationships. And you get to be who you are, and they get to be who they are. You compromise where you have to, but you learn to trust what you have. And that makes the world a lot safer. Therefore, we are much calmer with the people that we're with.
Perfect. Nailed it. I think that's good.
Yeah,
See you
that's
guys
great.
in the outro. Thanks, Dad.
Great.
And that is it for us, folks. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. This has been a topic that Jeremy and I have spent a lot of time talking about. Thankfully, we had a great coach, Gerry, to help us through this relational integrity process on our relationship together as we were dating and then getting engaged and married and stuff. So it's made a huge, wonderful, positive impact.
Extremely helpful.
Extremely helpful. Really, really great to have that perspective on things, especially since I didn't really grow up with that kind of perspective in the first place. So it was awesome. One thing I wanted to mention to you guys who might be my clients is I love that red flag analogy. Like if you have heard me, if you see me nutritionally, you know me talking about red flags as the first sign of a problem in your body. If you burp when you have meals, if you have gas, if you have bloating, if you have heartburn, any of these little seemingly tiny little things, if you have skin irritation, that's a red flag from your body to say, hey, something's wrong, pay attention to me. And a lot of my nutrition clients know if I don't pay attention to this red flag when it's a little red flag, it's going to become a big red flag, or something really bad is going to come down the road, or really big symptoms, or really big health crisis that you really don't want to have to deal with. So deal with it when it's tiny. I love that idea of working on relationships kind of from the ground up and taking those little red flags, those little whispers you hear. Ooh, I don't really like that. Ooh, that person, they were kind of like, to use what you said, rude to the cashier or whatever. That matters. That stuff matters. And it's okay to ask questions and have conversations and talk to your friends about this. Friends, relationships, romantic relationships. It's open the lines of communication. It's a really great thing to do.
Yep.
And this is the outro. So thanks for listening again. You can find all of our show notes on our website at thepainterandthepixie.com. You can follow us on Instagram at thepainterandthepixie and have all of our show notes on the various platforms there. And I'll have everything hyperlinked for Gerry's information, Lakeside, and all that too.
Yep. And we will definitely have my dad back on. We have a few other topics that he is definitely say like an expert in.
Oh yeah.
So, and some of our other favorite things to talk about. I think we're going to be entering into the world of some relational health, some communal health, things like that that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of months here. And I'll be having.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, it'll be super good stuff. I think those are all the things. So thank you guys very much for listening and or watching. And anything else, sweetie?
No,
good?
I think we're good.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, until next time, relax, be kind to one another, and we will see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Amazing.